One of the core factors in dictating a Pokemon's success is its environment. For example, if a Pokemon resides in a tier/gen where the top Pokemon have a type advantage over it, it probably will struggle. Likewise, if a Pokemon resides in a tier or gen where it's the only one that can fit a certain niche, it's basically guaranteed some type of success. So we will be going over Pokemon who quote-unquote were introduced in the wrong generation. Pokemon that would have done good if they were introduced in previous gens. Some basic rules for this is that a Pokemon has to abide by the mechanics of the gen I'm introducing it in. For example, there will be no fairy types in any generation before 6, or Dark Steel types before Gen 2 since they didn't exist either. Number 1, Ambipom. In Generation 1, normal types were incredibly overpowered, tied with Psychic for the best type. Fighting type moves were virtually non-existent, and normal types were among the best Pokemon, such as Snorlax, Blissey, and Tauros obviously. Also, Paralysis was an incredible status condition. It still is, but in Gen 1, it's by far the most popular, and a very common way to spread it is via Body Slam. However, normal types were immune to that. Additionally, crit rates were also determined by speed. The faster a Pokemon is, the higher the crit rate it has. And Ambipom has a speed stat of 115. That means that it would have a huge crit rate of 22.46. For some context, that's higher than Tauros' crit rate at 21.48, who is the best Pokemon in Gen 1 OU. Additionally, some of the best and most common moves in Generation 1 for normal types include Body Slam, Double Edge, Substitute, and Hyper Beam, which Ambipom has all access to. At 115 speed, Ambipom would be able to outspeed Tauros, Gengar, and Zapdos, and overall most of the metagame. And as for special moves, it also has access to moves like Thunderbolt, like its fellow normal-type Tauros, making it possibly a good special attacker, which at this point it's fully capable of being because you can still max out all of your stats. Ambipom would also be the only actually good Pokemon to have access to the move Counter, which does exist in Generation 1, but only bad Pokemon like Poliwrath have access to it. So while Ambipom hasn't had a lot of competitive success since its introduction in TPPOU, where it was in the UU tier, if it was introduced in Generation 1, it would have been a force to be reckoned with. Next is Hisuian Zoroark. Hisuian Zoroark is very underwhelming. Right now, obviously, Team Preview kind of absolutely ruins it, but Hisuian Zoroark would have been an absolute beast in Generation 1, capable of rivaling even Tauros. The reason I say that is because Hisuian Zoroark is essentially just Tauros, but a better one. The reason that Tauros was so incredibly valuable was because he was just a fast normal type who was capable of dishing out mixed attacks. And since the special stat was 1 back then, combine that with being able to max out stats, this results in a bulky Pokemon that's hard to get out of the field. And if we take a look at Zoroark, he has the same speed stat as Tauros at 110, which means that he would have the same crit rate at 21.48%. Hisuian Zoroark is capable of dishing out strong normal type moves, and while his attack stat might not seem that impressive, remember this is in the context of Generation 1. And he's also a strong special attacker, which is really what sets him apart. In Generation 1, the only viable Pokemon was immune to the dominance of strong normal type attacks like Body Slam and Double Edge, and Explosion is Gengar, but he isn't able to dish him out himself. Being able to do that and be immune to it would be a huge deal in RBY. I am absolutely sure that Hisuian Zoroark would have been one of the best Pokemon in Gen 1 OU if he had been introduced then. Next is Generation 2, Spiritomb. Spiritomb is a fantastic typing of Dark and Ghost. While that's a good typing now, it was even better pre-Gen 6 since its only weakness in Fairy didn't exist. However, Spiritomb never had a lot of competitive success, even in his debut generation. So what would make him good in Gen 2? Well, some context first. Hazards are very important now, obviously, but in Generation 2, it was particularly pivotal since you need to wear down your opponent. Because back then, again, you could still max out your stats, so everyone was far bulkier. This results in a metagame that can feel very slow, and that makes rapid spinners vital on most teams, since this is before Defog had been buffed. And since spinners were vile, so were spin blockers, aka ghost types, since they're obviously immune to rapid spin. The problem is that these ghost types is that they're usually very vulnerable to the newly added dark type, and more specifically, Pursuit. However, because Spiritomb is a dark ghost type, it wouldn't need to fear it. That makes him incredibly valuable, but also unique. There is literally no other Pokemon in Gen 2 who can do what he does. So he wouldn't offer much offensively. His typing combined with natural bulk would make him a lot more reliable than other common spin blockers like Gengar. Next is Barraskewda. Barraskewda is pretty much a meh Pokemon overall. Yeah, it can hit pretty hard and go fast, but when it comes to swift swimmers, other Pokemon have done it much better. Take Gen 7 Swampert. However, in Generation 5, I believe Barraskewda would have been a great addition, specifically to rain teams. Gen 5 was defined by weather and hyper offense. It had sun and most importantly, rain, which was very solid. Rain teams were popular in Gen 5, yes, but there was actually a really big lack of good swift swimmers. Most rain teams usually consist of Politoed, Starmie, Tentacruel, Thundurus, Ferrothorn, Keldeo, Duality Twins, or the rare Gyarados. The highest ranked Swift Swimmer in Modern Gen 5 is Kingdra, who resides in the UU tier, and the other Swift Swimmers are usually unreliable and weak, like Kabutops and Amistar. The thing that makes Barraskewda pretty straightforwardly better is that it's faster, having a speed stat of 136, and stronger, having a physical attack stat of 123. He outspeeds the fastest water type in the OU tier by a lot, that being Starmie, who has a speed stat of 115. He outspeeds her by a solid 21 points. Additionally, what at this point in time rain teams also lack are good physically offensive water type Pokemon, since at this point it is mostly a special type. The most notable water type attacker is Keldeo, who usually uses Hydro Pumps. And while yes, there is Gyarados, with the presence of Thundurus and Hazards, he isn't very reliable and hard to get on the field, so Barraskewda would be a perfect fit. That's the list of Pokemon introduced in the wrong generation, quote unquote. I'm sure there are more Pokemon that I missed, so you can tell me about that. But it's fun to imagine an alternate universe where these Pokemon didn't suck and did manage to have a bit of time in the spotlight.